Hey everybody, this is Mr. Munson, and we are starting to go into Chapter 8, which is going to be dealing with quadrilaterals. And basically, in this section, we're going to be looking at 3 sets of quadrilaterals. Quadrilaterals are just simply 4-sided figures. So we're going to have 3 special sets of triangles, or of quadrilaterals. The first set, they're circled in green, are called trapezoids. The second set are called parallelograms, and the third set is called kites. And so basically what's going to end up happening is we're going to start off with the basic idea of quadrilateral, which is a 4-sided figure, and then we're going to add a characteristic to it. And then once we add a characteristic to it, it's going to send it over into the category of the green ones, the red ones, or the blue ones. So we'll have to understand what those characteristics are and memorize which one they are. Most students find this, relatively easy if they stay up on their vocabulary words. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our vocabulary words. Just for those people that are looking for that bit of a challenge, I'm going to encourage you to kind of read through your vocabulary words. You can find a link to reprinting it or printing it for the first time in the video, just in the description box below the video. Just click on that link and you can print up your own copy of it if you don't have one. But go ahead and go through the vocabulary words, put me on pause, and just see which kind of words you might already know. And of course, the capital letter there is kind of a clue to what kind of words I'm looking for. Once again, the main words that start off here, those words should be actually written on the back of these forms, not put in that spot. There'll be times when we write things inside the paragraph. It's not part of the main word. You go ahead and fill in those spots, but the main word should be written on the back. All right, and if you like, you can put me on pause and see which words you can come up with on your own. Maybe you already know some of these words. Otherwise, let's get started. All right, first up, a quadrilateral. And the basic characteristic of a quadrilateral is that it has 4 sides. Next up, it's a parallelogram. It's basically, again, a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of parallel sides. Okay, you can spell out the word parallel there you want. Okay, so if you look down here in the picture, you'll see that there's 1 pair of parallel sides, and here's another set. Okay. Now, in this figure, any of the sides can be called a base. So, finding out the height of a parallelogram depends on which side you're choosing to make it a base. Okay? But the height is always measured as a perpendicular, like in the picture, is always measured from one base to the other, okay, and it's direct. So it's not one of the sides from a base to a base, or a side to a side, but rather a perpendicular, such as this one. Now, a rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. Okay, go ahead and put me on pause and see if you know how to draw a rectangle. Now I want to be real clever here. That's not a rectangle. And the reason it's not a rectangle is there's nothing indicating right angles. So we need to put that into the drawing. Okay? All right, next up is a rhombus. And a rhombus is a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides. Now when I draw this, I never draw it like a square, because it can be leaning over like this. There's nothing in it that tells you that there's right angles or anything like that. So what we do is we mark, we should mark all 4 sides with exactly the same mark. There's 4 sides that are all congruent, so if one side's 5, they're all 5. Okay, so if we take the characteristics of a rectangle and the characteristics of a rhombus and squeeze it into a quadrilateral, something that has 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides, then we have ourselves a square. So that's easy enough to draw, and we want to put all the information into it so the reader knows that it's a square. So we'd mark all 4 sides, that's the rhombus part of it, and then 4 right angles, which is the rectangle part of it. All right. So last up on this page is consecutive angles. Now consecutive angles, as the example down below shows you, are 2 angles that share a side. So there's that angle, And so if I look at angle K, they both share that top side, right? So that means that they are consecutive angles. And there's nothing particular, like they're not necessarily congruent or whatever. When we get into the parallelograms, we'll know that they're supplementary. That comes back from the parallel lines section of our chapter, okay? So those two angles, J and K, are consecutive angles, and so on. There's several sets of those in that picture. All right, next up on the next page is the words opposite angles. And opposite angles are two angles that do not share a common side. So for instance, if I look at angle A, which is formed by these two sides, and then I look at angle C, which is formed by these two sides, none of them being shared, right? None of them overlap each other. That means that A and C are opposite angles. Now, this is previous knowledge. We've done this a long time covered this idea for a long time now. Now, the next category of quadrilaterals, we just went through parallelogram, the category of parallelograms. Parallelogram turn into rectangles and rhombuses, and then a parallelogram that has a rectangle and rhombus property turn into squares. This next category of polygons or quadrilaterals, four-sided figures, the next category is called trapezoids. Okay, so a trapezoid is a quadrilateral, four-sided figure with exactly one pair of parallel sides. Parallelogram has two pairs, right? So this only has one pair, and if you look down at this picture, you can see it's that pair. Now, obviously the picture could be rotated, and that would make it, a little bit different, but it's just one pair of parallel sides. The height of the triangle can be found by measuring the distance, and distance is always straight. We never measure distance between two lines as a diagonal like this, right? So the distance is, or the height of a trapezoid is measured from going one base to the other. Now, it doesn't matter if this trapezoid is upside down, like this. These are still called the bases, okay? There's two of them. I like to refer to them, just as base 1 and base 2, right? Okay, so if you see that kind of writing in the future, that's what we're talking about. Now take a look at this trapezoid. This trapezoid has two pairs of sides that are congruent. Now it's really important. These are not the parallel sides. We'll find out later on, if the parallel sides are congruent, then it's not a trapezoid at all. But don't worry about that right now. Okay, suppose we have a trapezoid where we have these legs, as they call them. The legs are congruent. What kind of trapezoid is that? It starts with an I. You've heard this word before, and it comes from, if you think about it, a triangle that has two sides that are congruent. Okay, that's an isosceles trapezoid, and that's where the legs are congruent. All right, so those are our two types of trapezoids. Now we're going to move to another category of quadrilaterals, four-sided figures, and that's called a kite. So a kite is a quadrilateral, right, with two pair of consecutive sides that are congruent and no opposite sides that are congruent. That can sound kind of confusing, but if you just look at the picture, it makes sense. This side and this side are opposite sides, and they're not allowed to be congruent. Okay, that's what the opposite side's not congruent. They have consecutive sides. That means they share an angle. Consecutive sides are congruent. Okay, so that pair would be congruent, and this pair is congruent. Okay, and so it has two pairs of consecutive sides that are congruent. That's what makes it a kite. All right, now before we finish out this last one, a mid-segment, I want to tell you that please continue on, because there are some do-it problems after this, and I want you to make sure you do those and bring them to next class for full credit. All right, so the mid-segment is basically go ahead and fix this, of a trapezoid. Let's go ahead and fix that on yours, and I'll fix it on mine. The mid-segment of a trapezoid is a segment that joins the midpoints of the two non-parallel opposite sides of the trapezoid, okay? So a mid-segment, you grab the midpoints, and you draw a connector like that, a segment, and we now have our mid-segment. Now, that's an old word. We've had that word before, back when we were dealing with side splitter and all that stuff. Okay, well, that's it for your vocabulary words. Let's move to your do-it problems. Okay, so here's your do-it problems for this. I want to go back and make sure that you're reviewing our polygon information. So again, this is your opportunity to go back and kind of solidify once again some formulas. So on the first one though, it's a parallel lines question. Don't worry about solving the equation, as I said. All right, there it is. We'll see you next class.